Okay, I am here in the cab area, and this is the driver's foot area, which is where the chassis battery is. So I'm going to be removing all the flooring basically to open up underneath so I can get to the chassis battery. And I've already disconnected the negative. This is the negative to the chassis battery, so you always want to disconnect that first. And these screws right here in this piece are Torx head T25. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this panel and take this up to show where the chassis battery is. Okay, now you lift out this mat to get to the battery box. And then here's the chassis battery box. And there's 4 screws, and those are T30 Torx head screws. And then you remove the cover, and there's your chassis battery. Now this is my 2014 Unity Murphy bed chassis battery, which is a Group 49 AGM battery. What I'm doing is I'm basically opening up everything so I can get to the chassis battery, because I want to run a new 4 gauge wire for the Victron Smart DC-DC charger. Okay, now to get this mat out of the basically out of the entire floor of the Sprinter cab area, you have to remove this little toolbox, and it's just, you just twist this and then it, lifts out, and then you have a little tool area, and then now you can I'll still have to take off this edge, this little trim panel, and then I'll be able to remove the entire plastic mat. So and these are T25, I think I said T25 Torx head screws, so they're the same as the other side. So I'll get on with doing that. Okay, now I'm just going to pull up all the flooring and get down to just the bare metal of the floor. Once you get the floor pulled back, you'll see there's a wire run area that runs from the battery box across to the driver's seat, then across the seat to the passenger seat. So that's where I'm going to pull an extra cable from the battery box over to the passenger seat. I'll just snake inside that trace and pull a wire. But before I do anything, I've got to remove my passenger seat so I can get under. So that means I got to take off these. There's 4 bolts in each corner, and they're 11 millimeter. So I'll get on with that. Okay, I pulled the seat off. I have my vinyl seat base cover pulled off, and now this can come off, and I am in my passenger seat base, and I can start running my wires. Okay, I'm under the rig, and I found where my cables go into my passenger seat. So now I'm having to pull out, chip away the styrofoam so I can see where the wires enter, so I can run a snake to pull a new wire through. And this is basically right after the corner where the rig joins the cab and the coach, just behind your passenger seat on the cab side. Okay, I don't know if you can see that, but you can see where the wires are going up into a black area. up here. There's actually a little, like a channel. Like there's a channel running, you know, towards the front of the RV that the wires are going into to the passenger seat. So that's where I'm going to run my snake to see if I can get it to pop out of the passenger seat. Okay, I got my coat hanger run up through and to the passenger seat, and I've got my 4-gauge cable for my Victron Smart BMS ready to pull through. So I'm just going to tape it to the end of my coat hanger and pull it on through to the passenger seat. And there we have it, my new wire. So now I'm going to fill this area back with spray foam and zip tie my cable. Well, zip tie my cable around first so it's secure, and then fill this area up with spray foam, and I'll be done. To put this in perspective, the hole that I ran the wire in is straight above my equalizer leveler hydraulic fluid tank, and the passenger side step is right there, and this is the corner where the house joins the cab, basically right here around. So that helps you understand where the access point is to the passenger, underneath the passenger seat. All right, and here is where I pulled it out into my passenger seat base. Now that hole was much smaller. It was about the size of that hole down there. So I drilled it out so I would have a larger hole, an easier hole to hit when trying to run it up from underneath. So my cable's pulled. Okay, now I need to run a 4-gauge wire from the battery, chassis battery, through this trace between the seats and out this hole. And as you can see, I used my Klein snake, and it came out right here. So now I'm just going to tape my cable to the end of this and pull it on through. Okay, so I was able to pull my cable through and through to the other side. So now I can get on with my chassis battery connection and putting in my Victrons. Before I do that, you know, I already have my Kisae installed. I have my circuit breakers that I took off my old isolator solenoid. They're down here. My isolator relay to disconnect the Kisae whenever the ignition is off is right here. This thing right here is basically, it's the way I'm using it is as a Blue Sea remote battery switch. And the way I have that connected, this is something I had when I had lead acid batteries, but it can't be used with lithium batteries. But it can be used, it's a multifunctional switch that can be used just as a plain old off-on remote battery switch. So the way I have it connected is I have this connected across the two input terminals of my house battery circuit breaker and my chassis battery circuit breaker. So when if I want to jumpstart, if I need to jumpstart my chassis battery from my Lithionics house batteries, all I do is open these circuit breakers because I don't want any back feed going on with the Kisae. So I open the circuit breakers to disconnect the Kisae from the house and from the chassis battery. And then I come over here to my panel where I have my remote switch, which I leave off unless I add, unless I need it for an emergency jump start. Then I just flip this switch to on, and the way I have it connected on the input terminals of these of these circuit breakers is then it joins the house battery connection to the circuit breaker and the chassis battery connection to the circuit breaker, and allows me to then use my Lithionics house batteries to start my chassis engine, my engine battery. So just something, if there's other people out there that have the advanced ability to do an installation like that, I'm just pointing out how you can use a Blue Sea MLRBS remote battery switch. Okay, so now I'll get on with my Victron. Okay, here I am at the chassis battery box. Here's my cable that I need to connect. Remove the cover. Okay, now this right here is called the MIDI fuse block, and it sticks down inside. Okay, so I've got my 4-gauge wire run from underneath the passenger seat, and it's running, between the two cab chairs, and then it comes out underneath this little plastic cover, and there's a wiring trough there. So rather than, I'm not going to hook it up to, this is the MIDI fuse block, and there's already a number of things connected to it, one of which is my current 50 amp DC to DC charger, which was this was the isolator solenoid wiring. So I reused that. That was 4-gauge. I reused that for my 50 amp Kisae DC to DC charger. So for my second DC to DC charger, I also ran this 4-gauge wire. But you can see the wire that's powering this MIDI fuse block isn't very big. I think it looks like it's only 4-gauge, maybe 2-gauge. So adding another 4-gauge wire to this fuse block is probably going to overload the power that this cable can supply. So I'm actually going to attach it over here to this empty terminal, and I went and found a nut that fits it perfectly. So I am going to pull that and put it over there. Okay, I have that connected. I need to get those wires flattened. I'm going to put a little wire loom on this just to protect it, especially right here where it's close to that nut. And I will button this box up and get on with connecting my Victron new 50 amp Victron Orion-XS DC to DC charger. Okay, I've got that all put back together. Now I just need to put this cover back on. It's going to be a little tight now. So this is going to take me 2 hands to get back on. But I'm going to put this cover back on, and then this cover back on with its T25 Torx screws. And then I'll put the flooring back, and then I'll put this little trim panel over here with its, oh no, this is T25 over here, and this is these that go to here at T30. So I'll put all that back together, and I'll be done under the passenger seat, or under the driver's seat. Okay, I have my passenger seat base all prepared for my new Victron Orion-XS. This is the chassis battery wire. Okay, so here I am. I've got my Victron Orion-XS. I have installed everything for connecting it. I have my house battery connection. I pulled a separate 4-gauge wire up through where all the wiring comes in to the seat base, which is under the rig. So I pulled that through. I did have to drill a bigger hole in the back of the seat base so I could grab it though. So that helped. So I've got that new house battery cable pulled. It's connected to my 12-volt Victron Lynx power-in bus bar system with a circuit breaker. So normally I use a 60 amp circuit breaker in here, just like I'm using a 60 amp circuit breaker there for the chassis battery connection. And you can see I wrote chassis battery on it. But I wanted to have an easier way than having to take this cover off of my seat base if I ever want to disconnect my Victron. So I actually put the circuit breaker at closer to my bus bar, so it's easier for me to have access to if I want to isolate this DC to DC charger from the house battery. So, and I ran a new 4-gauge wire under the seat. There's a channel there. You can run it, you can fish a wire through and pull it through the channel, or you can actually just lay it on top. And then put the carpeting and stuff back over, and it runs straight over there to the chassis battery box. And I've already connected that to the chassis battery. So now I've got my ground wire run. I've got my ground wire run for the Orion. I've got my house and chassis battery wires. So now I can open up my Victron 50 amp new Victron XS DC to DC charger. And what non-isolated just means it uses the same ground. So instead of having a separate ground for the house battery and a separate ground for the chassis battery, you just use one ground. And in this case, since everything in my Unity leisure travel van is ground to the chassis, I connected my my ground to that chassis bolt there in the seat base. So I'm only using a single ground, just like you're supposed to with it. Now you get this little instruction book, but inside is very important. Victron is now giving you a unique PIN number with each device. So you have to use this to start it up when you first, start doing your setup. Used to be 6 zeros, but now they're giving you a unique PIN number for each Victron device. And then if you ever have to reset it, you'll need this PUK number. So you want to put this little piece of paper someplace where you can find it again, or you can change the PIN code, and you should mark whatever you change your PIN code to on this piece of paper, so you always have it in case you ever have to refer back to it. But like I said, you have to have the PUK number to reset it, so save that. Then we've got the Orion-XS, and it's a lot, as you can see, it's a lot smaller. Definitely a lot smaller than my 50 amp Kisae DC to DC charger. So this is going to be my second DC to DC charger, and I'm going to limit my output of both of these to 90 amps because Mercedes actually recommends 80 amps of alternator charging for upfitters who are doing things like this. But that's conservative, so I'd rather push it a little bit So I use 90 for my setting, and I've been doing that with my rig, with this Unity, and on installations with lots and lots of other people's, and 90 has never ever been a problem. So trying to go for more of a maximum is exactly what you want when you're trying to get everything you can out of alternator charging for the house battery bank. So another thing about this is I found out that the only way to make these 6-gauge wires fit in the barrel terminals is to use this 6-sided, it's called a hexagon crimper, instead of the square kind of crimper that I used to use. This used to make a square, would take a ferrule and turn it into a square end. This turns it into more of a roundish end, which is exactly what you need to fit into the terminals of this Victron XS. And the Victron will take up to 4-gauge wire. I'm also going to be connecting a switch to this so I can actually turn it off and on, and I'm going to put it on my panel here. So let me get on with that. So one of the first things you have to do is you have to remove this, which is called a strain relief cover. And it's just a small Phillips head. So take that off. And then you see your barrel terminals. And like I said, I'm going to use my hex crimper so I can put it down in there. You need a flathead screwdriver for that. And this, where I'm going to put my connector, it just pops out. And I'll replace this little jumper wire with the switch wires that I'm going to use. Another thing I want to do is I'm actually going to put this is called a Victron battery sense. And this reads voltage and temperature. So I'm going to put this right in the middle of this case, because I do want to monitor the temperature of this. And I've connected the other end to the my chassis battery connection down there. So this will read chassis battery voltage, but more importantly, it's going to read temperature of this Victron Orion case. A couple of these that I've already installed, people have reported that it was overheating, but as soon as they turned the output down to 45 amps instead of the maximum of 50 amps, then it stopped overheating. So I'm interested to test this and see what kind of overheating temperature we're really talking about. Because basically at 104 degrees Fahrenheit is when it starts to derate, or basically, say that it's overheating and it's going to start reducing its power. So I want to monitor that. I mean, I have this top of this seat base, I have a big ventilation screen on it, so it gets it should get plenty of ventilation, but I'm just interested to see what kind of temperatures it does get to. Now, I'm not going to be running it at its maximum because I get almost 48 amps out of my Kisae. And remember, I said I want to limit my maximum output of both of these to 90 amps. So I am going to turn down the output of this to 42 amps. So it really shouldn't have any problems with temperature at a reduced output. But I still want to monitor it and see, what we're talking about, and test it. Turn it. I'll turn my Kisae off and put this up to 50 and see what kind of temperatures I am seeing. So I'll know more about how it operates. Okay, I will tell you have to have very strong hands to use that hex crimper. Well, one of the things is you can see that this is too long when you stick it in there. So as you can see, it's too long. So I'm going to cut off about 1/4 of an inch so it fits up in there just a little bit tighter. And then I'll use my needle nose pliers just to round, hex the end again, round it so it fits. I'm going to tell you, even though they say that these terminals can accept 6-gauge or 4-gauge wire, I don't see how it's going to happen. I could barely get the 6-gauge wire in with a ferrule on it. So anyway, so I've got that in. The house battery is your output because you're charging from the chassis battery. So your chassis battery is input, your house battery is output. So let me continue on with making these connections. Okay, so I've got this connected to my switch wire, and there's my switch. So this now gets plugged in right here. It snaps in. Those 6-gauge wires are really a bear. Oh, for the ground, I didn't mention, you can use a minimum of a 10-gauge wire. I'm using an 8-gauge wire, but simply because I had already made one up for another installation, and I was, just reusing it. So you can use 10 at the minimum, or 6 if you want to be equivalent. I'll just use an 8. That's, that's more than adequate. So I will get this little cap tightened back up to cover my connections. I actually forgot to add my isolator relay to the chassis battery or the input connection to the Kisae. And this relay is ignition controlled. So when it's on, so when the ignition is on, the circuit closes. So then the Kisae gets its input from the chassis battery. And then when the ignition is off, the relay opens, and that isolates the Orion-XS DC-DC charger from the chassis battery when the ignition is off. And you want that because neither of these DC-to-DC chargers ever turn off. Basically, DC-to-DC chargers don't turn off because they start when they sense that the alternator is running and charging the chassis battery, or basically that the engine is on. So you have to put these isolator solenoids in, and you can see here's the one for my Kisae, and then of course that's the one for the Orion-XS. But basically you need these so they stay isolated from the chassis battery when the ignition is off. Then that way, I also have a trickle charger going on my charging my chassis battery. I actually have an old trickle start that I had from my original lead acid batteries. So when the trickle starts charging your chassis battery from the house battery charging system, then these DC-to-DC chargers think the engine is running because they see that increased voltage on the chassis battery wire. So then they start they start up and they think the engine's running, so they're going to start charging the house battery, and you create this do loop of charging that basically runs both your chassis battery and house batteries down. So you always want to have an isolator, ignition controlled isolator relay with these DC-to-DC charger installations on the chassis battery connection, so it's isolated or basically turned off when the ignition is off. So I will get on with hooking this up. I'm basically just going to tap off the wiring, for the ignition and for the ground from that relay to use with this relay. And you can see I've already hooked up the ignition, the input wire from the Orion to the load side of this. So now I've just got to connect from there down to here, my 60 amp circuit breaker, to put that isolator solenoid in line with my chassis battery connection. So I'll get on with that. Okay, I have got my relay, my ignition controlled relay for the Orion DC to DC charger, all connected. Oh, and I also put a label in the package. They give you 2 labels. One you need to keep in a safe place so you can refer to it, and then I just stuck it there. Although now I can see, I may not be able to see it because of the wiring, but there's also the same label on this side. So anyway, if you need your information, it's on the Orion. So my ignition control relay is hooked up. I used some piggyback connectors to tap off of the ground and the ignition wiring of that relay. So everything, I've got it all nice and zip tied, everything back into place like it should be. So I am now ready to start it up and do the settings. Okay, I turned the house circuit breaker on, which started up the Victron. You can see its little blue light flashing. I like to just turn the house side on, and then I can do all the settings and make sure it's set up right before I actually start the end, close the chassis battery circuit breaker and start the engine and see how it's doing. Here's the cover that I've made for the top of my seat base. I have a nice big screen so it can get plenty of ventilation. Here are the settings that you can use for your Victron Orion-XS, and make sure you enable live data so you can see have a nice dashboard with small snippets of data for each one of your Victron devices. I have a screen recording of the complete settings process at the end. All right, there we have it. Now my batteries are full, so they're, not, the amperage is falling off because they don't need it. But there you have it. My installation is complete.